Being able to have quantitative data to back up your qualitative data just takes it to the next level, just makes it that much more powerful. And it gets us to those conversations where I think we're seeing that the future fight is not going to be on these 10, 20-year R&D cycles.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year, but so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley. Mark Twain famously said, "In a gold rush, sell picks and shovels." As momentum in the defense industry continues to accelerate, it's a great time to be supporting the ecosystem not only of operators, but of the companies that are building the technologies that they need. Mobilize, today's spotlight, does just that. They connect end users inside the federal government to the companies that provide the capabilities they need. The company's flagship product is a cyber success story. It's gone from science project to significant program. Jade Baranski is Mobilize's founder and CEO, passionate about connecting and growing the community of small businesses that make up our nation's industrial base. Today, I talked to Jade about what Mobilize has done, how they've done it, and all that's still left to do. Hope you enjoy. All right. Jade Baranski, co-founder of Mobilize, with us today. Jade, it's so great to have you. Thank you so much for making the time to join us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. So Mobilize is such an interesting story. We talk a little bit in the intro about how you all are supporting this ecosystem of entrepreneurs, of operators, connecting folks from different communities who really need to be brought together to impact the mission. But tell us the story. Tell us why does Mobilize exist?
Yeah, I love the story. I'll give a tiny bit of the backstory and jump to the why we exist, because I think it helps kind of tie it all together. So couldn't have done it without Jerry Ramey, my other co-founder. It was actually him and I. So there we were at one of the earliest pitch competitions that the Air Force threw. You know the one. It's like Shark Tank, but the Air Force. Actually, really high production. We were at the Innovation Rodeo. So Spark Tanks, they wouldn't like me to call it the little brother, but at the time it was new. It was 2019.
So this was pre-Spark Tank.
Spark Tank is happening. It's the beginning, effectively. Innovation is, Will Roper and them are doing their thing. AFWorks has just stood up, and now we're having competitions. So Jerry and I were actually there pitching with an airman. First and only year they ever let a company pitch with an airman, which was smart. It was some weird, rule breaking on accident. But the cool thing about that experience was they invited us to come back and train the airmen on how to pitch. We were a startup. We've bought and sold. We were in tech, very slick presentation as you do on Shark Tank. The other folks trained and pitching they briefed effectively. They got up and did what they were used to doing with their leadership. And they said, that can never happen again. You need to come train them. So how cool. We would love to. The thing that we pitched was actually an inventory management system. And I honestly feel like we dodged a bullet not getting into inventory management for the Air Force, because that is a whole different can of worms. Next year we came back. We are there to train. So about 50 airmen. We've got 8 teams. At the time, they were using a top-of-funnel tool that it really didn't distinguish between, Noah, you think we should be able to have beards, and I have the best sensor modernization concept for a weapon system. Those all went into the same pot of data. So we end up in this room with 8 teams. We start going around doing introductions. The second team effectively is doing an Uber Eats on base. Very cool. They're focused on the overnight shift workers, folks who really can't get food on bases, right? Totally legit. Keep going. Get to the 7th team, and it was like a DoorDash on base. And everyone in the room had this moment, when everyone's feeling the awkward, am I the only one hearing that this is the same thing? We're looking around. It turns out that the organizers had no idea. They had submitted the ideas just differently enough. So on the spot, we're there in San Antonio, first day of the training. Those 2 young airmen, Nadisha and Kevin, get voluntold to work together. It wasn't a choice, right? Because they weren't going to get put up in front of 2 stars pitching the same concept. That just wasn't a workable thing, and really led to the conversation in the green room, which was the folks who ran that competition came to Jerry and I and said, hey, if we gave you this data, and we know it's messy, we know the data's messy, but if we gave it to you, could you produce a dashboard of sorts, showcasing that overlap, the collaboration potential? And this was also the time, so remember 2019, everybody was obsessed with dashboards. everything was a dashboard. So we, not knowing what a SBIR was, we wrote a SBIR phase 1 in partnership with IMSC. We won that SBIR phase 1 very quickly. And the problem statement, as I'm sure you can imagine, just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, it had nothing to do with a dashboard. There wasn't even a dashboard in the first version because there was no single source of truth to collect the data to begin with. So that, right, there was no normalization. There was no way to say what I'm talking tech, my tech type mind is the same as what you mean, Noah. So that led us straight into a SBIR phase 3, which we produced the first version of Vision in about 6 months after 6 months of R&D interviews. And I'll pause there because I could get way into more of like the why and the how, but I want to, let you say something.
No, hey, look, this is such a great story. There's so many just interesting nuggets. Like, first of all, the dashboard era was such an interesting moment in time, gave rise to the common operating picture, single source of truth for everything. But even just the mechanism here, I actually want to get into your headspace, Jade, because every good entrepreneur, they say kind of falls in love with a problem more than a solution. But as you were showing up, it actually doesn't even sound like it was so much a problem as a mission of supporting the uniform military. What brought you onto that stage in the first place? And what was your headspace like where you were willing to take that kind of a pivot?
Yeah. So at the time, we did have some dashboard tools on the market, communication, dashboard analytics. And we were working mainly in sort of the state, local, county, very governmental system around food. So think like food banks, food delivery, food access. We got into that right at the beginning of COVID. And the mission there, right, it's pretty incredible. Like feed people, help people not be hungry. It's a mission that aligns very closely actually with the military around like you are there to produce an outcome that is important to people's livelihoods, right? Their day-to-day experience of what it means to be a human. That space really got us in the conversation for, these problems seem so big, the food access space, we'll say national security, just to bucket it all into one massive thing. The problem seems so big, but when you start to break them down into these more manageable parts, there are things that small teams, like our company, small teams can make a huge difference in one area. And we got a really good taste of that in the communications company that we had at the time. I will say in the military space, our entire SBIR phase 1 report is just the problems. And the sort of myriad of these problems are so big, each one of them so big. Like start with silos. The amount of silos that are in data, and oftentimes like there's a ton of data that no one else has access to but the person who originally created that data. And I think we had even at the time in 2019, we had some idea that there were like magical fairies creating data and like it was just all going to go into one system, right? Like all data at some point came from a human being. And just that one problem, like that one piece of the bigger picture, solution that we ended up getting to, we spent 6 months on the normalized data for Vision. 6 months in user interviews, reviewing the data that existed, filling in the gaps that weren't there. Like the data structure for Vision is a massive, massive interconnected web of all the most important things. Because when you don't have that foundation, right, that here's what we can stand on to actually get to the point where we can provide insights and feedback and what's actually working, what's not working, it's not possible. So we did actually spend an inordinate amount of time on the problems. 9 months of the first year and a half was just digging on the problems. And yeah, they still are massive, right? We're chipping away at them one little piece at a time.
Can you help make that real for us? What's something that a user's done with the Vision platform?
Yeah. I'll give you one of my personal favorite examples. We have whole reports of examples, and the entire system has scaled with organic momentum. So no one's forced to use Vision. There are no taskers. Nobody in the Army is telling you must, or the Air Force or the Navy. So it has to work. And that was a really early, we got that for not just ourselves, but from our users. If we don't get value from this product real fast, the chances of us using it are slim to none, right? So that's the thing that has really gotten us to this point. But back to the point of the story, one of my favorite examples is the classic kind of Spark Cell vibe, right? You've got a small group of people who are really passionate about innovating, modernizing, making the mission better for themselves and others, and they come up with a great solution. So in this example, this was a team working out a PACAF, and I still can't believe this was true because this is recent, but it's true that the way that we, as the most powerful military in the world, load cargo onto aircraft is quite outdated. We were still using in-ground scales, tape measurers, and paper, actual paper carbon copy forms. So heaven forbid it rains, because if it rained, you had to start the whole process over because we're outdoors. So this team said, hey, this is obviously like, we can't move quickly. There's nothing agile about this. Like in the region we're in, we need to be able to get up off an island quick. So they looked out to write commercial off the shelf solutions, packaging something that would work in the military, and found this nice package of rollaway scales, laser measurement, modernizing and digitizing the entire paperwork process. So really taking that like completely outdated process, nicely packaging it up, did the whole process in Vision. The director of that innovation, set at the highest major command level, was looking through to find something to give to the commander. And he just happened upon this team and the solution because he had searched for the criteria using normalization, the different areas and the types of functional environments that they were looking to go after. And he found this team. So this team who before Vision would have found that solution and they would have had it locally. Yay, great. That is good, right? That's true. But because it gets seen at a higher level, it has since scaled to over 8 locations. It's coming stateside soon. And this is an enterprise-wide type of solution. That this happens all the time, where one small team, I always think it always starts with one group of people. They come up with something, and it either gets found out about, there's either some top-down transparency, or there isn't. And Vision was really built for that, right? To close that gap between who's up here funding things and driving demand signals, and then who's actually experiencing the problems and knows the solutions.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in there to unpack. I think one thing that stood out that is such a common theme, especially with respect to software and new things with respect to the defense market, which is you don't have a lot of time to deliver first value. You want to ship an MVP, put some piece of capability in the hands of the user. It doesn't have to solve the whole problem, but it's got to do something. It's got to do it well, and it's got to do it fast. And you all being able to do that, recognizing that you don't have months and months to show value, super, super key. Then on the product itself, that idea of visibility, and I think it's such a good way. I mean, people hear about this all the time, right? How many times does the government buy the same, legally, of course, they're not allowed to, but the same thing, and different organizations are building bespoke solutions to similar problems. And so even from a efficiency standpoint, if you were able to actually reduce the amount of time the government bought the same thing or shine a bigger spotlight on bright spots of success, what a huge benefit to the joint force and to the whole enterprise. What an amazing tool. What an amazing opportunity for folks who are benefiting from the platform.
Yeah. And definitely, to your point, having this enterprise be so gigantic, right? Because deduplication of effort, although it seems so obvious, like we should take resources and not just reinvent the wheel over and over, there's actually a lot of issues with that when you start to break it down by budget and the culture and promotions and all kinds of different things that they don't get talked about a whole lot, but they're there. What we found is another example of when you actually put this stuff in a visible space, right? So you have enterprise level problems that get put into Vision. You have teams in the military like Tesseract, who their job for logistics, right, is to come up with enterprise-wide solutions. They put the problem, they put a beta solution, they can get 8-10 teams like that, right, within a month on board, and they can start scaling an enterprise level solution in months, which previously to Vision, right? Because you're talking emails, phone calls, like trying to figure out, someone PCS, they have the quote, we can't find anything. Like that was the actual reality before. So the ability for these teams to scale and move really rapidly is, right, Vision is like that single source of truth that lets that all happen.
Yeah. I mean, you all are definitely not the first to try to do something like this, right? To make visible what are all the different innovation projects or science projects across the ecosystem. In fact, there are probably still multiple other ones that are trying to do this. But why were you all able to be successful? And not only successful, but on this time frame, right? You all went from proof of concept to phase 3 transition in pretty darn quick, in near record time, it feels like. What enabled that? How did that work?
Yeah, I've been told by senior leadership that they've never seen a company move at this speed through these phases. And, again, like we didn't know that when to us, it seemed normal to go from a SBIR phase 1 to a fully funded phase 3. Turns out, much more challenging road for most companies. I think the first it was so painful. The problems were and it was getting so in your face because innovation was getting all this attention. duplication of effort was starting to cause real issues. Like we literally walked into an accidental copycat. What are the chances of the 350 submissions they choose to that turn out to be 95% the same? It just statistically, like repetition, I think, and that duplication was happening a lot. And I think the second thing that really gave us an edge, and I will credit my co-founder, Jerry, for this one for the rest of my life, it was really thinking from the beginning of listening to the problem, starting that human design-centered process of like, let's not go for minimum viable, because we were pretty certain from the moment that concept was pitched to us by our stakeholders that it wouldn't work. Because minimum viable generally sucks. Truly. Like, if you look at a real MVP of something, a prototype, right, they generally suck. And the chances of you staying in that system and using it are very, very low, especially when no one's forcing you. There's no taskers, right? Nobody's calling you to force you, right? None of that's happening. So we took a different approach, and he coined it the most wanted product. So we went through, and Vision's built as a microsystem. So we always knew there's going to be tons of modules. This thing could grow and change, right? Like all software over time. But we had a roadmap with about 30 modules, major feature sets from the beginning. And we racked and stacked based on stakeholder feedback, the demand signal from most users to what data we thought was the most important. And we got it in an order that we thought, okay, these 5 modules, which is what we released in the first version, will make a huge difference. And I will say the one thing that we did that I don't know of any other company that ever attempted this, at least in this early phase, was we built an entire set of algorithms and machine learning behind the scenes to actually take that data and overlap it with each other. Like what was on the napkin in the drawing in the green room, Jerry drew a little napkin to show a cluster map, that made it into the first version. Because we knew, right, if we don't have that, if there's not that differentiator, that value prop that we can grow and scale, it's going to be hard to go back in time and get it in there. So that was really the rack and stack, and then that making sure we had the data structure so that we could showcase that. Like that's not something big CRMs do. They don't have that built into their infrastructure.
I'm not sure, Jade, but I think you might have just lobbed a bomb right at Steve Blank and the lean startup methodology and Eric Ries. And I don't know. I mean, I love Steve. I don't know if we're about to do battle here, but that's fascinating. So I actually think if we were straw manning the argument, I do think there is something like a true MVP. What do we mean by viability? Viability isn't just like something that you can ship. It's what is something that you can ship that's going to make a difference for your user. And so I don't want to step on Jerry's toes. I'll let him coin that phrase, but I feel like I got to defend the big guns.
I don't disagree conceptually. I think this is know your audience. Are you commercial? Are you government? Are you who are these users and what is going to actually keep them engaged? Because you want to know how many MVPs a normal person in the military might see in their career. It's like this never ending, don't show me another MVP. Get this thing from me. Like you got to know your audience. Commercially, absolutely.
No, I think that's fair. So Jade, when you all deployed your most wanted product and started getting some traction, talk us through what does it look like when a customer wants it so bad that they're willing to fund that phase 3 before you complete the whole scope of work and all that? Because that's a thing that I think a lot of companies hear about. We know it's a possibility, but very, very few will actually get that phone call, have that email hit their inbox, or have that opportunity.
Going back in time, again, because we didn't know where this was all headed. No one has a crystal ball. But the thing that I think made the biggest difference for us during that transition, kind of the speed to scale, was we would always show up and add whatever value we could provide in the moment, right? Whether that's we're going to help you normalize this data, we're going to review the structure, we're going to really give you the best recommendations from the best minds in data architecture on how this can move forward. The amount of folks who try to work in this space, especially the innovation, this kind of woo, there's so much energy and there are so many companies too. So it's a high volume on both sides, show up and ask for a lot. They want to do interviews and they want to know where your problems are and they want this from you and they want that from you. And I think just like any other interaction, that starts to wear at you. And unless the team can show up and provide some early value, it's a hard relationship to build. And I'm still I will die on this. You can put me up on this pedestal that it's still relationships. The military and national security and the government, they're still human beings at the end of the day. They still are dealing with some breakdown, something they need help with. And if you can't show up with the help and you're just asking, I think it's wearing and it grates at people. It doesn't build good relationships.
So relationship centricity for sure. If we extend that story and say, okay, so you've done this, you've delivered some of this value, you have some of those relationships. What did it look like when you know, okay, phase 3 is on the radar. This is what we're going to get to do.
I now have seen many SBIR phase 1 reports that are very minimal. Call them MVPs, if you will. There's not a whole lot there.
Emphasis on the minimal over the viable.
Minimum. Maybe could be viable, but minimum either way. Our phase 1 report really baked a solution. This is the single source of truth. These are the top level features to solve these top level problems. Did we know that the phase 3 was going to come through? No, not until right at the time there was an innovation directorate with all the MAGCOMs in the Air Force. But we knew that we had put forth a great offer. We knew that we were ready to produce. We had the underlying data infrastructure ready to go. We could move really fast. We had our own engineers in-house, which I also think is more rare. I think a lot of times you have like 2 or 3 founders and they're going to find their engineers. That is a harder task to find really good engineers. It's harder than it sounds. A great data architect, there are not that many of them. So we had a lot of the foresight to say, here is the solution in the long run, the vision, as Jerry calls it. We knew that from the beginning. And then it's much easier to get buy-in because we're not playing a short game. We're not trying to win one little proposal and then win 20 more over time. We want to build out this modular system with you and for you as a collaborative.
So you use the phase 1 SBIR kind of as it's intended to be used, which is it's effectively paid business development for small businesses, right? You were using it to develop those relationships and find the problems and the people who needed the solutions to those problems. So interestingly, you said, hey, we knew we had a great solution. But crucially, and there are some listeners who are newer to this market and may even be newer to SBIR, you don't just submit a phase 2 and have someone pick up the phone normally and call you and say, here's a bag of money, go do phase 3. It's not linear in that way. And you're not even buying a lottery ticket, really. You're submitting a homework assignment, and then you've got to go create the next assignment. And so what did you all do with that phase 1 report that enabled a customer to come in with some money and put you on that contract?
Yeah, I think, and I've talked to so many other SBIR companies about this now that we're here. I built a whole SBIR 101 guide of all the lessons that we've learned, and I just turned them into a PDF. I did so many phone calls, and I still do, and I still will. And everyone's experience is different. But the one thing that I ask immediately is, okay, you want a SBIR phase 1. How many stakeholders do you have engaged right now? Total, how many? And if the person says 5 or less, I'm like, nope. Pick up the phone, start emailing. You need at least 50. At least 50. We were in a very unique position where we had hundreds because every major command put a little bit of money. They wanted something, effectively. It was a very good give and take for us, but we built most of those relationships in the phase 1. So by the time the phase 3 got funded, we just picked up the phone and said, you're already into this. We want your expert feedback. And we didn't think we had the perfect solution from day one. We knew the problems were clear and the solutions were available. We had a general structure of how it was going to go, what general feature sets, what big pain points we're going after. But we never went to our stakeholders and said, this is how we're going to do it, okay? It was a collaborative engagement that they were a huge part of. I mean, without those earliest, right, I call them the OGs on Vision, the folks who were there in the beginning, it wouldn't be what it is today.
50 stakeholders is remarkable. Any way you slice it, that's a ton of people. Even if you're batting, look, baseball, 300 gets you in the Hall of Fame. Let's say generously you were batting 1 or 2. That's 100 phone calls that you're making, 100 meetings, and it's probably more, right, to get to that level. That's just an immense amount of unfunded work to get to that place.
Slightly funded.
Well, with the phase 1. Sorry, this is by the end of your phase 1.
If you win a phase 1, this is definitely like, we had 4 people working meetings, connections, and preferably someone who's recently been in the space. I mean, that's the perfect world, right? One of your user. There's a reason primes hire folks straight out of the military. There's just the seriousness with which you take what is often viewed as kind of like free money or easy money to keep developing the thing you're doing. It's like, that's great. If you're using that to just funnel into R&D, that's fine. But that's not solving the problem of continuing your engagement with the government. So I think it's super, super interesting. And the other part of it, Jade, is you sort of had a product in a way that could have become tragedy of the commons. You have a collective action problem where, innovation it's diffuse. It's a lot of little things to many, many, many people. And so, what did it take? How did you get somebody to grab hold of this and say, this is going to be ours? We are willing to sponsor it, to own it. And even, I don't know if you have the long-term home for it in mind in terms of, is Vision going to transition to a program of record where you think it is a 5 or 10 year
landing spot. How do you drive accountability? How do you get someone to take ownership of something like this?
I will go all the way back to my, the number. If you read that SBIR guide, if anyone out there reads it, it talks a lot about provide value, add value, as much value as quickly and as much as you can. And that to me is if I look back and I'm like, what did we do differently? Like, what was different? Jerry and I both came from a services company background. We had recently bought a product, had scaled it, and we're getting into this. Okay, now we're looking at some federal opportunities, but that service background of listen to your customer, respond. There's this one crazy phenomena called if you say you're going to do something, do it. That is not as common, especially in this NatSec space. It's not as common as coming from service. That's just like a foundational. Of course, if you say you're going to do it. Of course, if you schedule a meeting, you show up. Of course, if you say I'm going to send you this report by next week. It doesn't actually pan out that way in this space. So I think when a vendor shows up and does that, because that was just our DNA, I've had senior leaders tell me directly that we have set the bar so high for them, expectations of the SBIR process. We've set it so high that they have a hard time working with other companies. And I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm really proud of the expectations that we've set. And I think it should be much more across the board on both sides. I think accountability on government. If you say you want something and you show the demand signal, you got to show up. And for us, we definitely also had to go meet them and send them sometimes a lot of follow-up emails. What seems like too many. Once you've sent 5, 6 follow-up emails, your brain wants to no, we can't send any more. Yes, you can. Keep sending them until they respond.
Have you done that? You've pushed past 6 or 7 and still gotten the positive result?
Yeah, I've actually had folks in government tell me, never stop emailing. Our job is to service whatever promises we've made, and we may be overbooked, we may have too much work, and if you stop, we stop. Falls off the radar. So yeah, I have some embarrassing strings, 150 back and forth.
150 follow-up emails.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. And then I think the stakeholder piece, we got a major command in really early, highly engaged, the whole team. They were the ones who originally brought us the problem, right? The accidental copycat situation happened with a major command. And I think at that level, if you have a major command engaged, scaling it to the other major commands, because generally they have the same problems, at least from what I can see in the data. And you have to know how to follow that leadership path. And if I could go back, I would have started a little higher than we did. We did a lot of grassroots engagement, a lot of feedback from day-to-day users, Spark cells, and I wouldn't take any of that back. I would have just paralleled it with more getting up to, the Heidi shoes of the world, OSD, R&E, acquisition and sustainment. These offices that eventually they're going to come into play if you want a long-term game, to your point. If you want to get it pawned, if you want to get into the NDAA, they've got to be bought in. And we are currently running that entire process. So TBD, we'll let you know in a future episode how that works out. But we've been working on it for 2 years.
We'll take that as a commitment to come back on once you guys land that plane.
Perfect. Yes.
Jade, it's actually a very, very interesting insight because very often our guests, especially on the 0 to 1 in the federal market, will take the opposite standpoint, which is that too many companies focus on, the flag officers, the HQ, senior leaders. And so it's interesting to hear you say, hey, yes, we did bottom up, but we should have also gone top down. And I'm curious if you have a broader principle there of why do you say that? Was there something you've seen, or was there a roadblock you ran into where you didn't have senior leadership and it would have been helpful? Let's start there.
Yeah, certainly not to say that we didn't have senior leadership in the beginning. We did. We had generals, we had folks at the major command level who were bought in. But I think the key with our software, and this is unique to us, so I can't speak for any other tool, certainly not software out on the market, but we specifically built it to have value from the bottom up and the top down. And I think we just weighted it a little more on the bottom up in the early days, which made sense for the majority of our users. But we definitely got into conversations, I know you had Tyler from Second Front on, and we were on Platform 1 in the early days. We were the first Rails backend on Platform. We built the Rails pipeline for Platform 1. And yeah, we had senior leadership. There were times that if we could have picked up the phone and made a call, eventually those things got sorted out, but the bureaucracy and the red tape was no joke. And I think if you couldn't get a couple months on your own, it could have been real painful.
That escalation pathway is helpful, especially in the early days.
Another very unique thing about Vision is we had full buy-in from the Air Force from day one for this to be a joint system. And we started that process very early. So we started with the Guard, right? Guard having emails from all different branches. Then we moved in to the Navy, and after the Navy, finally, the Army. But once we got all the branches in, that idea of joint implementation is so rare. But we, in many ways, are the first system that people have heard about, right? That's not like a TS, on giant type of level that is attempting to scale throughout the entire DoD with this cloud-based secure backend. So those types of things just add to the barriers, right? Because when you're the first, that means no one's done it. There's no policy. There's no regs. That makes people nervous.
Yeah. You mentioned Platform One. I think accreditation is something that's, barrier, stumbling block, at least for many of the folks coming in. There are increasingly, you mentioned Second Front, there are other solutions that are making this a little bit easier now than it was certainly 5 years ago. But I'm curious if there were other kind of enablers as you all walked in the door, some of this, I imagine, unclassified, easy, but were there other kind of test and evaluation, accreditation, IP rights kind of hurdles to you all going from small SBIR project to something that, oh my gosh, is now a legit funded requirement for a broader, larger customer?
Yeah, definitely the DoD-wide data sharing piece was that's an ongoing, we've cleared all the blockers. And as you think about scale up to OSD, right? Is it DIU? Is it CDAO? Like, who owns all of the military? Currently, the branches own their own, but it sits in one system. So there's larger conversations that, honestly, I think it goes straight back to it's never been done. And this is one of those, it's going to keep happening. I certainly don't think we're the first and last. I think this is going to be an ongoing, there's probably other projects happening in parallel to us that we'll never know about because they're not in vision. And I think there's an opportunity for us, and I think other SBIR companies, to, when that kind of stuff happens, it's like the grit and the follow-up and the persistence and the urgency. I've had so many mornings where I get out of bed and I'm like, I need to move. If I don't treat it that way, no one over there is treating it that way. But when I treat it that way, I can get a lot of buy-in and support. And we've had incredible stakeholders go way further than they had to. They want to see this thing succeed. They're bought in.
There's nothing more powerful than getting someone on the inside in a position of authority or influence working with you to drive a decision or to drive action, because we all know the frozen middle is a real thing. And if you're a bunch of people's 15th favorite thing, that's really hard to motivate them to bump you up their to-do list, which is why Brett Gramberg from Vannevar Labs, another guest, he talks about, really, if you're not solving a top 3 problem for somebody in that moment, you're nowhere. If you don't rank at that level, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to motivate action. And if it's not that person's top 3 issue, then you either got the wrong customer or you've got the wrong problem. Talk to us a little bit about growth for Mobilize. How are you all thinking now about the future? Is Mobilize going to become a multi-product company, or is it going to be that, hey, vision is now this, it is the backbone that we're going to go deploy into other agencies and other organizations and maybe wrap some services around it and just kind of grow from there, more like a traditional CRM?
I never use the term CRM or project management tool to describe vision, because it creates this expectation, right? In the early days, it was a problem, right? Because that's how our brains work. We want to compare things and find something that looks like what we're talking about. And the reality is twofold. One, the joint innovation system, the core of that data infrastructure, the collaboration, the overlap, what we're doing on the machine learning AI future front it's not happening in the market. And that's super exciting. And that's vision, call it 4.0, because it's evolved many times since that launched. And now bringing Ignite online, you're never going to make it through this innovation, modernization space to implement anything unless you're working with companies, right? Whether that's small, medium, the bigs, right? You're working with industry to get these things done. So we were able to partner up with AFWorks about a year and a half ago to build out a matchmaking tool that not only sits in vision. So if you're in vision and you're working in initiative and you've got a collaboration effort with 3 different teams, you can go see the companies that automatically match. But there's also a separate system where you can just enter directly, and it solves a lot of those early stage phase 1 trying to get to phase 2 type of problems, where if you don't know the person, we literally were in the room with the team who had the problem when the problem was presenting itself. we knew, right? Like we knew the top 10 people in the room. That's not normally how it happens, right? You're responding to some solicitation, you're maybe doing an open topic, a D2P2, something, and you think you have, the right solution. But if you can't find the right person, to your friend's point, who's been on the show in the past, it won't matter. You're not going to win a SBIR phase 2. You're not going to get funding long term because without those stakeholders, you're just throwing information into a big old black pit. It's not going to return anything. So between Vision and Ignite, those are really our two core products because there is a use case for Ignite that doesn't require Vision. And we really see that as the front door to American innovation, right? So building out that defense industrial base connector where has that been attempted in the past? Yes. Has it been done with data that connects the demand signal? No. And that's what we think makes it a really unique opportunity, not just for us, but for the marketplace in general.
To pivot slightly, I want to talk a little bit more broadly about the state of kind of the defense ecosystem, the national security ecosystem. I know one of the things we share a passion for is being able to quantify problems and bringing data to bear. And so a lot of these conversations that often happen at kind of strictly the opinion level, especially in the innovation community, everybody's got an opinion about kind of what needs to be done. And so as you think about whether it's vision or whether it's just the other innovations in the ecosystem over the last kind of few years, I'm kind of curious, what are some of the things that you think we still need to be able to measure and to quantify with respect to getting new capabilities into the joint force faster?
Lots of things. But to hone in on the data front, because that's really, right, that's our sweet spot. At the core, Vision is a data platform. The thing that we have seen a gap that can Vision solve this? Yes. Are there other data sources that could be pulled in to do that real fast? Yes. And that is getting to the left of, the warfighter innovation concept. So, operational innovation is a big, or combat innovation. You're starting to hear that language more and more, which is like, I need something. I have a problem in the field and I need to solve it with an actual thing. Generally, that could be software, right? That could be a weapon, something like that. But being able to actually connect all of that data to the left, so the R&D that's happening, that we're spending, in fact, billions and billions of dollars on every year as a country, that sits in a completely different infrastructure, completely different bureaucracy that's a bit more academic in nature and not necessarily as keen to provide full transparency throughout the process, but is still funded with the same federally, right, our taxpayer dollars. And we really believe that getting left of that, our sweet spot right now is that operational innovation, combat level innovation, but getting more of that R&D data in. So this is like, think the national labs, right, the academic institutions that are funded to do the research for the DoD, being able to track that all the way through to acquisition. The data generally is available. It is getting that buy-in to have it all in one place so that you can tell a story, which we didn't necessarily mean to get this particular module funded and released so early in the process, but we did get return on mission effectiveness. It's been live for about 6 months now, and it's all about this exact process. So it's all about being able to track each step through to acquisition. And if it's a failure, it's a failure, right? Like you can actually see that pretty early on in the process if you're pulling data from both sides. I think we've had lots of innovation programs that I hear about, and I think this is innovation theater personally, when things aren't getting measured effectively and they keep going and it's obviously not working. Well, yeah, that sucks. But if we don't have a way to measure that effectively and stop it, it's not going to stop happening. Because to your point, stories are powerful. Opinions are, we're human beings. That's how we communicate. So unless you have the data to back it up, I don't see that changing.
Data is not exclusively quantitative data. Qualitative data matters too, right? Especially collected from user groups and from people who can tell those motivating stories to bring emotion and context in far greater detail than a number ever could. It's not exclusively about numbers, but it is about a rigorous effort to collect what's coming out of these efforts.
Well, and being able to have quantitative data to back up your qualitative data just makes it that much more powerful. And it gets us to those conversations where I think we're seeing that the future fight is not going to be on these 10, 20-year R&D cycles. We have got to be able to move faster. And data allows us to move faster because we know what's working and what's not, and we can actually move the needle. So I think there's lots of benefits, and I would love to get into a debate with someone about the cons, because I think it's more work to track the data. Absolutely. But is it worth it? Yes.
Are there examples or is there a story or two you might be able to share of something where you've seen a really smart data-driven decision in the innovation ecosystem, whether Vision supported it directly or not? You've been close to so much of this over the last few years. I'm curious if there's something in the win column that you'd be able to share.
Yeah. Let me think. Something that I'm allowed to share. Because it's, systems IL4. We provided sort of an ad hoc report for it. This is the early days, like 2021, late 2021. There was a big conversation for innovation being this sort of very hyper-focused in a few locations. So think like DC and Austin and some areas in the Bay in California. Even in the military, it was there weren't not a lot of interoperability in regions or bases or anything like that. And we produce, because we have a crazy infrastructure for the organizational data that lives in Vision. And I would say we probably have the very best Space Force data available to anyone, because new organizations get added real time. On our end, manpower, that process is not real time. You go through the appropriate channels. So we were able to use all of that data to say, okay, let's take the initiatives, let's take all the technology types, the functional areas that they're working, plus the regions, plus where they're located in the world, and show a heat map of what's really happening, so that we can give senior leadership a sense of, like, physically speaking, where are the teams that are actually creating the most momentum within the space? And I think that actually led to many decisions that I wasn't privy to, but the request for that data came from a really high level. And because Vision, right, is normalized in this way, that's the type of data that we can push out easily. And prior to Vision, I honestly don't know how anyone would have produced a report like that. That wasn't typed up in PowerPoint. That's probably what would have happened.
No, that's a great one. I think we talked about the transparency to be able to see what's going on is hugely valuable. Jade, I know we have a few minutes left. I want to do a quick lightning round with you here. So a couple of either ors for you. You could give me one word answers. We don't have to go too deep here, but I'll shoot you a couple. The first, partnerships or direct sales?
Direct sales.
Bootstrap or VC?
Bootstrap.
Hardware or software?
Software, obviously. We need both.
We need both. Thank you. It's one of these ridiculous conversations going on Twitter, right? Of like atoms or bits. It's like both. We need both.
There's no software without hardware. We need both.
You need both. Fantastic. Before we let you go, I think as you're looking now here in 2024 versus when you all started the company, I'm curious just your high-level reflections on the industry and the market. What do you think is different if you're coming up as an entrepreneur who wants to build in the defense market today? How does that look different than when you were starting things?
Yeah, I think it is so busy right now. I think the amount of attention and the amount of funding and the amount of commercial interest went from, it was like interesting and like kind of cool, but a little edgy, to it's coming way more front and center, like middle of the road, and everyone's involved and engaged. And I think it makes it much more difficult to penetrate this market with real relationships with real people, because there's just, the volume has increased. If you just go look at SBIR submissions alone, it's like went from like a reasonable amount to thousands and thousands for every open topic, which, that's significant. Yeah.
Well, if you've made it to this point in the episode, you've already got a leg up on the competition because you're learning from the best. Jade, so grateful for you taking the time to speak with us today. If folks want to learn more about Mobilize, if they're interested in maybe joining on the talent front, or if they're sitting in a government office and they're like, man, I got to get on that platform, or I got to see what's going on, how can they get in touch with you, or how should they find you?
Yeah, we're always hiring, so please look us up for that. If you want to engage on the front end, learn a little more, get a demo, you can always reach out to us on LinkedIn. We have a super active customer success team. I still do demos. I love doing demos. And if you're in DC, we're there quite frequently, so we love to come visit as well.
And the website is?
mobilizevision.com.
mobilizevision.com. Everything will be in the show notes, including a link to Jade's fantastic guide on how to write and win a SBIR. So, Jade Baranski, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day. This was fantastic. A lot of fun. Thanks for being here.